Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Cyber Back to Basics webinar. I'm your host, Sherry Branson. I'm now joined by Kevin Davis of Kevin Davis Insurance, and Kevin joins me from Los Angeles. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Sherry. How you doing?
Doing great, doing fantastic. How are you?
Pretty good. Trying to get my camera and everything together. Okay, there you go. Yeah, doing good. How's your weather today?
Nice. No rain, no thunderstorms. Yesterday we had a big storm roll through, but it's nice. It's not as humid. It's beautiful weather today, nice and sunny. How's it there in LA?
You know what? I tell you, I can't complain. This has been the nicest weather we've had in years. I mean, it's been like in the 70s, barely hit 80s this whole year. So I'm not complaining. And I know people out there who are now surviving 100-degree temperatures, and here we're in LA and it's barely 80. So move
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, LA does have perfect weather, that's for sure.
It's been perfect so far, that's for sure.
Uh-huh. Great, fantastic. Well, Kevin, I'd like to welcome a lot of new attendees today. We have a lot of new people joining us who've never been on our webinars before, so welcome everybody. And I'd like to mention that I record all of our webinars and I put them on our website, which is kdisonline.com. That's kdisonline.com. You can listen to today's recording and all of our past recordings as well, all of our other webinars about D&O and crime, etc., umbrella. And I also wanted to mention a couple of things. On the toolbar, you'll see a Handouts tab. If you click on that Handouts tab, you can download the PowerPoint from today's presentation, and then you can print it out at home or at the office. So it's the Handouts tab. And then there's also a Questions tab where you can type in your questions, and we're going to stop halfway through today's webinar to answer some questions. And then if we have time at the end, we'll also answer some questions as well. So we do like an interactive Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, just type them in there and we'll answer your questions later on. So let's talk about cyber. Kevin, today, what's our goal?
Sure. Today was a beginner's guide to cyber insurance. We'll talk about why community associations need it and exactly what is cyber insurance for community associations. It is something that we've been talking about a lot lately, but every once in a while we get that phone call and say, can you explain cyber crime to us? What is cyber insurance? So today, that's our goal.
Absolutely. Certainly, we do get a lot of questions about cyber. I know I get a lot of questions all the time about cyber. So Kevin, what exactly is a cyber crime anyway? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. When we talk about cybercrime, we're basically talking about any criminal activity involves a computer. And basically, the U.S. Department of Justice divides cybercrime into three categories. Number one is crimes in which the computer is the target to gain access to information inside the network.
Okay, so basically, so they can steal money, like the assessments, the reserve account, that type of stuff, right, Kevin?
Yes, that's number one. Number two, they also want to take personal identifiable information, things like social security numbers, driver's license number, account numbers.
So basically, when that information is stolen, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, or checking account with savings account numbers, that's a data breach.
Exactly. That's what we're talking about. They either want money, reserve account information, reserve information, or they want data so they can have identity theft. So those are two things we talk about cybercrime, but that's only number one. The second one, second involves when a computer itself is used as a weapon to launch a denial of service attack.
Okay. When you say a denial of service attack, some people might not know what that is. Can you explain what it is?
Sure. When we talk about denial of service attack, it's when a hacker starts generating requests over and over again and actually shut down a system. They may do it to extort money or just have a competitive edge. One of the biggest ones that I read about is from like 2012 U.S. Bank. What happened, they flooded the servers out there with requests and actually shut the whole system down. So that's a denial of service attack. And then the third area, so the first one is just stealing the data. The second one is shutting the system down, and the third one is when crimes which computers use as accessory to crime. So you understand? I mean, yeah, it was like child pornography, for example.
Okay. And today we're talking about the first example, right, Kevin?
Yeah, the first example we talk about where it's a target, where the computer sells a target and they want to gain access to that information there. People either want the data that's in there so they can have identity theft, or they want the information so they can steal funds. So that's what we're basically talking about today.
So that's basically why I know everybody who's joining us today is in the community association industry. So that's why community associations need cyber.
And that's the bottom line, is that what we're talking about today is why they need cyber insurance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's cyber attacks hitting businesses all the time, Kevin.
Exactly. In fact, it's interesting. There's a former Cisco CEO. His name was John Chambers, right? He said there are two types of companies: those that have been hacked and those who don't know yet that they've been hacked.
Well, that's kind of scary. That's pretty scary. So there's a lot of hacking going on out there. We hear about it every day in the news.
And again, that's why today is really important. We talk about two things: why community association needs cyber insurance, and again, what cyber insurance is. So when we go right into why they need it, okay, there's several reasons why I believe. Again, community associations are really unique and different kind of entities, all right? And they need cyber insurance. The first, and I would say the main reason, is because of state notification laws. Every state out there has laws out there that says that if certain things happen, you have to notify the individuals involved. So if a laptop or a phone or a tablet is lost or stolen, it can either be by a board member or a property manager, and there's personal identifiable information on there. You know, things like we talked about before, social security numbers and driver's license numbers. Then by law, you have to do something about it.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, usually, Kevin, people, when they lose a laptop, they are stolen or missing, they just run out and buy a new one. But now, because of cyber notification laws, the situation needs to be investigated. And if there's a chance a data breach has occurred, it must be reported by law, as you just mentioned.
Exactly. Now, that's number one. The second reason is a simple error and omission. A mistake by an employee or volunteer or management company employee where they just push the wrong button. You know, you get some information and you send it to everybody except for the people who should have gotten the information.
Absolutely. That could be a big problem. I mean, it could be something as simple as a monthly board packets accidentally sent to everybody in the complex and not just the key board members.
Exactly. And when this occurs and the information is really made public, expect lawsuits from the owners, people who really information is out there. And now the board has to defend themselves because that shouldn't have happened. Now, and if someone's identity is stolen, now you talk about damages, actual damages.
Yeah, another thing that comes to mind is paper files, Kevin. I mean, I live in a homeowners association, an HOA, and they keep their paper files forever. Some associations keep them for years. They have filing cabinets of paper files, and you're hoping that these files are being shredded properly and being taken care of properly. However, many associations keep the information too long, and when it comes to destroying the files, it's done incorrectly.
Yeah, and that's it again. And when it does, and we're talking about on those paper files, you're talking about personal identifiable information. And when those files get out, you put them in a dumpster, you don't shred them properly, and all of a sudden they fly everywhere. Guess what happens? You're talking about possibility of being sued and identity theft. I mean, both things can happen. The next one there we're talking about is rogue employees or volunteers. I mean, it could be a major problem for community associations.
Absolutely. I mean, the board members, they're volunteers. So these are volunteers. They don't have much training. They don't have much experience in managing a condo association or a business for that matter. And there's very little oversight for these people handling the data. So there's a problem with disgruntled board employees, board members, employees, volunteers, and unit owners.
And what happens is because there's very little oversight, as you said, once these disgruntled individuals, these employees, volunteers, they get into the system, they have easy access to credit cards, social security numbers, banking information, email addressing, anything out there, all designed to create a problem for the community association.
And this can turn into a very expensive situation for an association.
Exactly. Again, and that's what we're talking about here. These things happen. As a result, there's lawsuits that can happen. There's just the act of just the notification expenses. And we'll talk about this a little bit later.
Absolutely. Now, Kevin, can you talk a little bit about the difference in cyber insurance between what Kevin Davis Insurance has and the standard cyber policy?
Sure. When we talk about cyber insurance, okay, there's no such thing as a standard cyber policy. They're constantly changing because they're complicated nature of the exposure. The things that we're doing today, the kind of coverage that we have in our cyber policy, didn't exist years ago. We didn't even know that even exposure even existed. Now all of a sudden we're adding on to our cyber to meet the exposure community associations face. So when you're looking, first of all, you look for a standalone cyber policy. You do not try to put it in the package. Don't try to add it to the D&O or the, boiler machinery policy. I mean, you see these endorsements there. You need a standalone policy that's designed specifically for community associations, because when you do that, the property manager is covered also. So it extends coverage to the property manager, because again, at the bottom line is the property manager controls the data. They have the data. So if there's a loss, it'd probably be from the property manager. Even though it's from the property manager, guess what? The board is liable because they own the data.
So that's very important, extremely important. And I did want to mention one more time that if you have any questions, type your questions into the questions box, and we'll be stopping halfway through to answer your questions. Great. Okay. Thank you, Kevin.
So let's talk about the cyber policy here. It's cyber policy itself, okay? I mean, it can be very complicated because what we're doing, we're combining first-party and third-party coverages. We have coverage for fines and penalties, okay, which is unheard of for liability policies. We have coverage like extortion in there, and we have a whole assortment of crime coverage, social engineering and crime, fraudulent, all types of kind of crime areas. Today, what I want to do is something really simple. Is simplify the coverages so you can easily explain it to your insureds. So first thing we're talking about is liability insuring agreements, okay? When we talk about liability insuring agreements, there are two liability insuring agreements. There's privacy and security and regulatory proceedings. Again, that's it. Now, when we talk about privacy and security, the insuring agreement says that the insurer will pay loss on behalf of the insurer resulting from a Privacy and Security Act. So the key thing is, what's the Privacy and Security Act? The Privacy and Security Act is a failure to prevent a privacy breach, the failure to destroy confidential information.
Okay, and as I talked about earlier, the paper files, that would fall into that category too.
Exactly, that's what we're talking about there. The failure to provide notification by law, again, and the failure to prevent a security breach itself. So when we're talking about being sued for those kinds of situations, that's what we're talking about. Let me give you an example. So we're aware of a situation when a manager left his laptop in his car and the laptop was stolen. The problem was the laptop was not password protected. So he opened it up, and all of a sudden all the data is there. He had spreadsheets in there with people's names, maybe driver's license numbers, social security numbers. And as a result, the manager and the homeowner association were sued for failure to prevent and authorize access to the data. So again, what we're talking about there is lawsuit because of failure to prevent the breach itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, and don't forget that the community association directors and officers have a duty to protect the personal information that's been entrusted to them, and understand that the responsibility cannot be delegated to the property manager or an employee. So that's a very important point to remember.
And again, that's what we're saying. The property people believe that because the property manager has the data, that means it protects the homeowner association. The homeowner association is not protected. They make sure that they have the coverage, because if property manager's money, if the property manager data is missing, the responsibility falls to the board of directors of the homeowner association.
It's very important for them to know that information. Very important. They just might assume that it's all on, falls on the property manager's shoulders, but it doesn't.
Exactly. So that's the first. The second one we'll talk about from a liability insuring agreement is regulatory proceedings. Basically, the insuring agreement says that they will pay defense costs and regulatory costs on behalf of the insurer resulting from regulatory proceedings for a Privacy and Security Act. So again, we're talking about that same Privacy and Security Act, and the coverage is basically fines and penalties imposed by the government due to the Privacy and Security Act.
Yeah, and most liability policies exclude fines and penalties, and which is very valuable coverage.
Exactly, and that's the key there, because once the board is aware there's a breach, they have to decide what to do with that knowledge. Are they going to ignore it, or are they going to handle it correctly? If they don't handle it correctly, then you're talking about fines and penalties associated with non-disclosure, because what can happen is that if you don't handle it correctly, guess what? the same thing can happen again. You can have another data breach, and you can have another one. So that's where your fines and penalties come into play.
Absolutely. That's what makes this coverage so important, everybody. And Kevin, we do have a question that's come in. Do we have time for a question?
Yeah, okay, sure. It's perfect time.
Okay, great. Halfway through. Perfect. Yeah, somebody wants to know, what about prior acts coverage?
You know, and that's very important, because when we talk about prior acts, because we talk about liability, and again, it's a claims made policy. The liability part is claims made, which means a claim has to be made and reported during the policy period. If you don't have prior acts coverage, so you have to make sure prior acts coverage is there. And we do provide prior acts coverages, because what happens is that the retroactive date is effective today, but you don't know. Somebody could have been in your system for a year, 2 years, 3 years ago. So you really have to understand that prior acts coverage is really important under the cyber policy. So,
Great. So that's a great thing to look at, everybody, when you're looking at what a policy has and what it excludes, what's included and what's excluded. Great. And now, Kevin, what about the breach area? We talked about a private.
Well, I think I got another question there. Do you see it? There's a question from, I think I got a couple questions there.
Oh, I did not see questions. No. Do you want to answer more questions? You have time for more?
Okay, sure. Okay.
I didn't know if you want to do them at the end or not.
Michelle, if a HOA doesn't have a website but wants to create one for unit owners' access for items such as meetings, question should should such a list of do's and don'ts from the carrier's perspective that would include not including the website? Okay, websites are very complicated, because when you have the data's in the data, the access to the website itself. I would say this: when you have a website, if you have to have a website, you're adding liability exposure to the association. You know, it gets complicated, but the more you take on as an association, the more exposure you have. So kind of leave it at that. Okay. And second question we have here is, how does a fidelity bond, which covers crime, differ from cyber policy? Okay, we'll save that one to the end. That's a really good question to the end. Okay.
Okay, great. That question was from Elpida. So thanks, Elpida, for your question. We'll get to you at the end. Okay,
good. All right, so let's go back to talk about the coverage. So basically, we talked about liability coverage. Okay, and liability, we're talking about exactly being sued as a result and paying fines and penalties. The second part of it is breach response. Okay, when we talk about breach responses, that's the very important coverage, because that's the notification expenses. When we talk about notification expenses, we're saying from the insuring agreement is that the insurer will reimburse or pay on behalf of the insured for privacy breach notification costs resulting from a privacy breach. Okay? All right, again, simplify it. A privacy breach means a loss of by an unauthorized access or disclosure of confidential information. So the confidential information has been disclosed, guess what happens? You have that part of the policy. Okay? All we're talking about is paying the reasonable costs paid to the insured itself as required by law. Make sense? Are you with me there, Sherry?
Oh, I'm there. Yep, I'm there.
Okay. All right. So when we talk about those kind of expenses, we talk about things like printing and delivering notices, providing credit identity theft monitoring, call centers, cost of purchase identity fraud policy if you need it. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about privacy breach notification expense. We also have computer and legal expense. So again, we have to conduct a forensic analysis to find out the extent of the privacy breach itself, and then determines whose confidential information was lost or stolen. So basically, we're talking about, again, these are the first party parts of it. The third party is the liability. This part is the privacy notification costs. And then we have public relations, where an insurance agreement says that we will reimburse or pay on behalf of the insured for public relation costs resulting from an actual or suspected data breach.
And an example that comes to mind, Kevin, and everybody joining us, regarding an HOA and property manager, they had to hire, usually you have to hire a public relations firm to restore confidence in the HOA and in the property manager. So that's typically one thing that has to happen.
Okay, so let's talk about this other coverage here called extortion. You see the extortion coverage, and you got a brand new coverage. It's now available. It's called e-commerce extortion. Because now ransomware is taking money from business.
Now, can you explain to everybody joining us today, Kevin, what is ransomware?
Okay, this is ransomware. Your laptop, and you see your files have been encrypted. Payment is demand. You have 2 days, 23 hours, 58 minutes, and 59 seconds, or else all your data will be stolen. This, Sherry, is ransomware. This right here is probably one of the more famous ones, is WannaCry, which happened about a couple of years ago, and it impacted every Microsoft laptop out there, especially having a Microsoft that you did not update. This is what extortion is. This is probably the biggest exposure out there today for community associations and everybody. It's for all of us. You never know what day you're going to open your computer up, and see your files have been locked. And you have to pay a ransom demand if you ever want to see those files again. So when we talk about what is ransom coverage, what we're talking about is it's malware, first of all, and it's a virus. It can go on your laptop, your iPad, anything like that. And once that is, you need to pay within Bitcoins. And that's it. So when we talk about the coverage itself, what does it actually cover? It covers the monies to meet the extortion demand. So it allows coverage to pay in Bitcoins, that's what they want. Cost of hiring a computer security expert to prevent further future extortion attempts. And expenses charged by professionals to deal and negotiate with the cyber extortionists. Okay?
Great. Thank you.
So it's really important. This coverage here is included on all your cyber policies. I would say that all your cyber policies out there right now, this is the most important coverage there is.
An example that comes to mind too is a few years ago, a hospital in Los Angeles had its files encrypted in a ransomware attack, and they basically paid in Bitcoins to get their information back. And they were basically shut down for, I think it was almost a week. All the patients' records were frozen. It was really not a good situation with the hospital. So Kevin, when we talk about a data breach, what are the costs associated with a data breach?
Okay, so when we talk about the code, we talk about the loss that we associated with data breaches. These are the items we're talking about. These are the things what you're buying insurance for. So once there's a data breach, you need a forensic examination. The examination determines that there was a breach itself, the severity and scope of the breach, and who's part of the breach and who's not part of the breach. Once that's determined, you have notification of third parties. So you have all these different third parties, and most state laws have notification laws, but they could differ. So if you live in Ohio, but you have to have a condo in Florida, you may have different laws there that may impact it. You have call centers. You have to have call centers for people to understand what's going on. You have to have credit identity monitoring. Extortion expenses. If there is a ransom payment, you need it. Public relations. So you have to have a PR firm. Legal defense, because once you're sued. Cost identify victims. So that when Target had their loss, okay, they had to actually give out identity theft cards. They had to give the identity theft. Some people had to get identity theft fraud victims be taken care of. Then he had to cost identify financial institutions, so that for Target to reissue all those, for the bank to issue all those credit cards and everything like that. Guess what? The bank didn't pay for it. Target had to pay for it. And then you're talking regulatory proceedings, fines, and penalties. So these are the 10 expenses that you're talking about that involve in a cyber incident. So if there's a cyber incident, you can have all 10 of these things impacting you.
And it really adds up. There's a lot of areas that it's going to add up, so it can get very expensive. Exactly.
And that's important because the next slide we're talking about is how much we're talking about it costs. Okay. This is a 2018 cost data breach study that's done. They do it every year. In fact, they've been doing it for the past 13 years. It costs $148 per record. $148 per record. That's the cost.
Interesting. And Kevin, when you say per record, what does that mean?
Okay, so let's say you have a 100-unit condominium. It's not, you don't have one person live in a unit. So one unit can have two, three, maybe even four records. Okay, and if you talk about people who lived there before, or maybe somebody filed an application, you can have 7 records for one unit, 8 records for one unit, because again, it is historical. It's not just the people who currently live there, people who used to live there before. So you're talking about, maybe 7 records. Then you're talking about vendors, renters. You're talking about visitors, people who come in and maybe have swiped their driver's license in there. You're talking about employees. So you're talking about all these people. It can cost for a 100-unit condominium complex. It costs you up to $75,000.
It can get very expensive. Very expensive. Yeah. It can add up quickly.
So the point is that if you are trying to convince your clients that you need a cyber policy, there's 2 very important slides that we have here today. Number 1 is how much it costs, $148 per record. So you take $148 times the number of people in there, and you have 200 units, and you're talking about $150,000 for a cyber claim.
Yeah.
And you go through those list of 10 items there that goes through, this is how much it costs. These are the costs associated, from notification to just every aspect, the call centers, the lawsuits, defense costs, public relations. These are the things that really matter in the long run when we talk about cyber for community associations. It impacts community associations. We see more and more and more. People ask me, do we see claims in this stuff? Right now, the number 1 claim we're going to see is the e-extortion. We see those. That happens. And that's why we to our policy right now. This is going to happen more and more. You're going to see this. You're going to have more and more property managers, more and more people, because as this thing gets easier and easier, and it's WannaCry, this one right here was so important because it impacted and it still continues to impact the Microsoft platform if you haven't updated your system. Once you update it, this won't apply anymore. But if you have an old system or you refuse to update the system, you're in trouble.
And in a lot of the cyber seminars that they're having now, they're saying that the smaller businesses are much more vulnerable than the larger businesses because they don't have the IT protection or the firewall protection. So these small businesses are, prime targets for hackers right now. They're going after the smaller to medium-sized businesses.
And you have different levels of people who are learning it more and more and more. It is the easiest way to get money is by extorting money out of you. By you into downloading this information, clicking on it, and guess what happens? Now all of a sudden, you're encrypted, and you can't do anything about it but pay the ransom.
Yeah, they're looking for people are vulnerable to clicking on that fake email and downloading a virus, and then it's then it's too late. So Kevin, I do have a couple of questions that have come in.
Okay, sure. Let's do the questions.
Somebody would like to know, how complicated is the cyber application?
Okay, sure. For us, it's very, very simple. We have 4 questions that you have to answer, and it's about creating, updating passwords. So you got to have strong passwords. Next question is about the use of firewall technology and antivirus software. Do you have those things? And the bottom line is, are you upgrading your system? When those patches come through, you have to update your system. If you don't, you are liable for one of those viruses we just talked about. So if you do the things you should be doing to your computer, it's pretty simple question to answer. Application. Yes.
Okay, great. And who can complete the application, Kevin?
Okay, I would say right now we want to see the board fill out the application. But again, if the property management company has all the data and you want them to fill out the application, we have no problem them filling out also. So it's either the property manager can do it, the board can do it, but with somebody who really understands what's going on in the association so we can look at it. And again, make sure they're updating passwords, make sure they do have antivirus software, firewall technology, and they're updating the system. That is a critical piece.
Okay, fantastic. I have a question from Cecil B. She would like to know, what is the typical retroactive time period for prior acts coverage? Is it 5 years or 10 years?
Okay, it should have full prior acts on the policy, meaning that it should not be a retroactive date. Now, a lot of cyber policy do have retroactive date. You want to go back as far as you can because you don't know how long somebody's been in that system that's infected right now. Even though you back up your system every single night, you're backing up that virus or whatever that malware that's in your system. You've been backing up for days, weeks, or maybe even years. So you don't know what day. If you buy a policy today and you don't have prior acts coverage, that information could have been there just a month ago. So you wouldn't have as much. You want to go back as far as you can.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Thank you, Cecil. And I have a question from Isaac that just came in. So if you guys have any other questions, please type them in now because we're winding down. Isaac wants to know, have you guys paid any cyber claims on our program?
The cyber claims that we've paid is from the e-extortion. Now, what happens with e-extortion is that you have a situation where somebody locks in your system, locks out your system, totally locked out, and demands, $1,000 and or 30 or 40 bitcoins, whatever the exchange rate is. Then all of a sudden, when that claim comes in, the question is that person has the data, and if they have that data, then all of a sudden you do have a data breach loss. So you could have a data breach attached to an extortion depending on what they do with that information. So it's really critical to understand that everything locks in together. Once you have a data breach, by law, you have to do something about it. Now, to answer the question, how will you see a data breach loss from a community association? You will see it where, Sherry, you live in an HOA. You go to your board meeting. You talk to the president of the board. And the president of the board said he filed his taxes, and guess what happened? Somebody filed them before. Then you go, guess what? Same thing happened to you. And I live on the 3rd floor, and I go, same thing happened to me. So all 3 of us, taxes were returned. Somebody beat us to it. That is a cyber loss. We think the association has been hacked. That's what we expect to see. We will see it. We haven't seen that yet, but we have seen e-extortion.
Okay, great. And Isaac has a follow-up question to his question. He wants to know, what is the largest condo or association or HOA cyber claim that we've paid, or an example that you've heard of?
Okay, from a cyber claim point of view, right now we're talking about thousands of dollars. It's probably in a not 6-figure range, probably in a 5-figure range. Again, we haven't seen that many claims. They will start to come in, that we will start seeing them, because again, it's happening everywhere else. It will happen in our industry. The e-extortion is alive and kicking. One question that was asked earlier, and when we talk about cyber, the cyber is 2 parts. It's the actual data breach part and a theft of funds. The question, what's the difference between crime loss and cyber loss, is that we separate the crime. All crime loss information is in a crime policy. So you're talking about social engineering, you're talking about fraud, computer fraud, you're talking about wire transfer fraud, you're talking about computer theft. All those things are covered under the crime policy. And guess what? You will see losses in that area constantly. So when you talk about cyber itself, the data breach is separated from the crime losses. The crime losses, we see many claims. On the data breach side, we see e-extortion, and we'll see more of those.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for a great webinar, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I did want to give out our website one more time, where you can go and fill out an online application for a cyber quote and get multiple quotes for other products as well with one application. Our website is kdisonline.com. And please join us in August for our very special annual Meet the Underwriters webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Question and answers out there.
Yes, thank you for the questions. Exactly. Great questions, everybody. And have a great afternoon and have a great 4th of July. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Take care.